I am NetMoverSitan. We've covered the identities for the 3 that have had their stories covered so far. Now we shall cover the identities of Yi-sang so far. Let's go over the backstory of Yi-sang. He was originally from District 19, a place that appeared to be big on agriculture, although there was an unspecified turbulent time due to a mix of corruption and those not saying what they meant. Due to this turbulent economy and with uncertainty at the best of times, he left that district with Dongrang and Dongbig when invited by e.g.o to District 20, a place of technological growth, backing inventions and technology, where their kind could operate in relative peace, even though they had to sacrifice their colours to do so. But at the time, it was considered a price worth paying to them, and for a time, he and the rest of the League of Nine, as they would be known as, would invent things outside of their jobs. They had 9 rules, one of which being no technology made within the League shall be distributed outside. e.g.o suggested that he work on improving the glass window to remove any distortion in the image, which he did with the mirror device, where he kept in contact with Sang Yi, his left-handed mirror self. Sadly, this freedom to work on research for its own sake came at a price. On his day job, he worked as an architect, where he designed factories that are optimized for, effectively monitoring people. It made pressing laborers more convenient than ever. Yeah. Those managing those factories, they don't feel safe unless the workers couldn't even empty their bowels without them knowing about it. It's that bad. Yes, clearly the owners of these factories had measures in place to prevent unions from forming. Never mind disrupting productivity. Like the encouraging others to turn informants, where they'd sell out those wanting to organize a strike so that they themselves can get enough to support themselves, although he didn't use the money from his salary for himself. He used it to support the League's research. Unfortunately, this time wouldn't last, as T-Corp made them criminals. Because clearly there weren't enough criminals to crack down on before, as they sent an official notice that any private technological invention groups of 5 or more people not registered as a business required a permit from T-Corp, where any technology not authorized by T-Corp's tech agency would be confiscated. Whether or not this was a con trick from the start to allow T-Corp to snap up some free technology, or just a coincidence, I don't think it matters, as it led to the same result. Rather than let their technology be in the hands of T-Corp, which would most likely corrupt it beyond recognition, some chose to destroy what they invented using the concept incinerator rather than surrender it. It doesn't even matter if the League of Nine was established for the pure pursuit of knowledge. One of the League of Nine told T-Corp about the League's location, out of fear of being deported back to District 19. That was when they scattered. Those that remained were visited by T-Corp's collectors that demanded they hand over the glass window technology, which this collector knew was in the basement. Yi Sang didn't know this at the time, but Dong Rang sold them out in exchange for a position within e.g.o. When Dong Big set off fireworks to destroy the workshop, Yi Sang lost all desire to live and let himself be taken by e.g.o. Whether e.g.o was an N-Corp spy or someone that decided to go to N-Corp out of simple survival mattered not, as Yi Sang came with him regardless. e.g.o then assisted in using drugs to control his perception, to aid in his subjugation, although Yi Sang still refused to join N-Corp's League of Nine, while working on destroying all the mirror worlds. Then, Sang Yi eventually decided to persuade Yi Sang into stopping taking the drugs for a few days, which revealed the way out that was hidden from sight, and then he left, despite e.g.o's warning. He was then found by Faust and recruited into Limbus Company, the first of the damned dozen, with Faust being the second. The mirror device was then modified into a means of accessing alternates from parallel worlds, allowing their skills and abilities to be used for himself and the rest of the damned dozen that would eventually be recruited. He would eventually be forced to have a part in killing Dong Big, and then he would personally kill the sociopath Dong Rang. He understood that he would likely encounter others, and not just e.g.o, in his journey across the city. He would fight for Limbus Company in the meantime, but what if he found himself going down a different path? What if Limbus Company didn't find him? Let us start with 7 Association South Section 6. Yi Sang was sparring with another 7 Association fixer, with Miso doing the same nearby, noting that they were using the technique of the Zwei Association. They confirmed this as they struggled to best him in combat. So he turtled up a bit, or be more defensive this time. Honestly, why do people get them confused? There is a difference between turtles and tortoises. Turtles are water-bound reptiles, and tortoises are land-based reptiles. Anyway, Yi Sang saw this as commendable, but asked what weapon they were using. They told him it was a rapier. Yi Sang pointed out the flaw in this tactic, as rapiers are critically thin and Zweihanders are thick and large, the latter allowing the Zwei Association to defend and counter with ease. That would be more difficult to achieve with a slender weapon. Yi Sang was adopting the Sang Association's techniques. They saw the similarities. Yi Sang pointed out that, well, it's the basics that they need to borrow. To copy a known method is to leave yourself open to its known weaknesses or countermeasures. He slid his sword back into its sheath, saying that constant observation is key. An existing art can be made theirs, until it's been adapted beyond mere imitation or mirror image, suggesting they study the fundamentals by observing once more. They thanked him. Finished with his advice, he stepped outside. And while passing by Ryushu, he knew that he was respected by visitors and colleagues alike, and for good reasons. He appeared cold and uncaring, but he never shied away from giving valuable advice where it was needed. He thought that the coffee was good, although he didn't think much of what he did. In this reality, Yi-sang joined the Seven Association, which are basically private investigators, those that gather intel and aren't primarily a combat association, which is actually a good fit for him, considering his analytical mind, both with what he investigates and the combat techniques of those that he fights, and also of other associations. He seems to favour that of the Sug Association, which appears to favour piercing attacks, although he's also willing to assist others with combat training and recognising the flaws of, adopting the techniques of others, and likely assists others with other things. He is also likely to review the customs of where he's going, if and when he needs to do so. Although he'd likely steer clear of District 20, as even in that reality, he's likely to be wanted by T-Corps. And I suspect that even in that reality, he was still dragged to N-Corps by Gubo, and then escapes on Sangi's guidance. It's after that which the path would likely diverge, where unlike the main version of Yi-sang, Faust didn't find him and invite him to join Limbus Company. In fact, it's a little unclear if Limbus Company in that reality even exists. Hard to tell. All we know is who Yi-sang joined in that version of events. Next we have Blade Lineage Salsul. Though he merely yearned to gaze out the window, the paper covering obstructed the moonlight, much to his heart's discontent. He had dissatisfied, narrowed eyes. He had no interest in what was inside that building. Utis reminded him that he was the one that wanted to sleep in a tar-roof house. His disapproval of her words sounded by the noticeably long sip of his tea. She also reminded him that moving south was his idea. He didn't deny that. He slowly turned to face her, after her verbal assaults. They needed a new territory from which to extort. He offered an apt solution. Otis noting that he doesn't back down, does he? Yielding not being a behaviour that aligns with him. Otis asking, why didn't he take up the mantle as leader? Why recommend her to be the leader instead? Yi-sang told her that excess labour doesn't mirror his ideal performance, both mental and manual. Utis questioned that he was nicknamed Slayer for taking in excess of lives. He asked if it was his preference to be wholly focused when he does his job. When engaging in his rhythmed exchange, he stopped to recall something, then added, he remembered that Otis once asked this, "You're usually a laid-back jigster, so what transforms you into a cold-blooded killer whenever a sword is in your hands?" Rutis confirmed this. He hoped that today's exchange had provided an answer. He went back to his tea after that. He showed discomfort among many other things, but to describe them all in detail would be a disservice. In this reality, Yi-sang, instead of being picked up by Faust and joining what would become the Damned Dozen, was eventually found, and also found purpose with, the Blade lineage. They're less inclined to fighting in groups, only doing so out of necessity, when they do so at all. They also believe that if you lack scars, you're a coward. And it's unclear which finger that they're affiliated with, if any, but they're no friend of the thumb and its subsidiaries, that much is certain. While they're largely consisting of low-class people that like to kill people, they don't have a fixed base of operations. They rest whenever they decide to do so. Yi-sang is much calmer outside of battle. What makes him a cold-blooded killer when he has a sword in his hand? It's simple. It's out of simple survival, when his life is sufficiently threatened. He doesn't appear to have the same death wish that the main version of Yi-sang has, nor is he as inventive, or has a focus on the mirror device. Makes you wonder how the Damned Dozen of that reality gained an advantage similar to that of the modified mirror device, without Yi-sang. Then again, Faust is inventive herself, as she made Mephistopheles a bus fueled by feeding people into it, preferably alive. Now to move on to effloresced e.g.o. Spice Bush. Members of the Technology Liberation Alliance brought someone to their leader, Yi-sang, who asked if it was the trespasser. He spoke this in a dry voice with an apathetic expression, looking down on them. A member of the TLA confirmed this, as they were trying to loot enkephalin from the facility, coming alone to that branch facility. Yi-sang told the TLA members to go now. They did so, and then Yi-sang turned his attention to the trespasser, asking why the trespasser was there in the first place. He folded his fan shut, and the trespasser argued in their defense, who asked if he was their leader. Yi-sang confirmed this. The trespassing thief was risking their life to earn some cash. It's not like he rented that whole facility to them and kept it to themselves. Does it hurt to share some of that? Yi-sang was puzzled by this claim, although he seemed unconcerned regardless. He saw this thief as having a misunderstanding. The thief argued at that. They saw the fancy lab he set up there. They guessed that there wasn't any enkephalin that he could pocket either. Yi-sang informed the thief that it wasn't an installation meant for harvesting enkephalin. The thief not comprehending this, asking what else could it be. Yi-sang forcefully unfolded his fan, making his unwillingness to hear more of this clear. This shuts this person up, overwhelmed by the sound and the pungent smell emitted with it. The thief saw Yi Sang as strange. The flowers were on his head. Yi Sang saw the flowers on his head as bloomed things. The nostalgia in his mind for a certain time he would like to summon forth has taken them. The thief was perplexed, so Yi Sang stood up and slowly walked towards them, unnerving the thief. Yi Sang told them that there was no need to fear. They admitted themselves that they were risking their life. Yet Yi Sang had no hostile intent. His intention was on something far away. Yi Sang asked the thief if they'd seen a proper flower in recent times. The thief honestly answered no, not in person. Artificial ones were everywhere, though. Yi Sang couldn't deny this, seeing technology as having come to a point where it robs them of what originally brought them enjoyment and glee. One day, in their pursuit of convenience and expediency, they lost what used to matter more than technology. If it weren't for technologies, they wouldn't be living the life of a petty and Keflin thief, wouldn't they? This flustered the thief, who said no, but still, if it weren't for technology, they wouldn't be living at all. Their life was saved by a e.g.o ampule. Yes, even though that e.g.o ampule was ruinously expensive. Yi Sang briefly contemplated this in silence. He saw this as a fair point, snickering at this. The thief didn't get the joke. Yi Sang told them that he was assigned to be their leader, but his goal was significantly different from what they chant in unison. When an artificial flower was first made, when fireworks were first invented, the pure delight and joy of witnessing them emerge for the first time in the world, asking if they yearn for that feeling as well. The thief saw him as barking mad. Yi Sang couldn't deny this. Yet, it's a path that appeared quite charming to him. He felt his mind bloom wider than ever as he conceived that idea. His mind was clear and steadfast. None could dare snap it. This identity is basically Yi Sang swapping roles of Dongbik, where in this reality, due to fireworks, he burned half his face and manifested the spice bush e.g.o, although it's likely not to be under the same circumstances as, for a start, he's still alive. It's likely that he was less rash than Dongbik in the main story, based on the fact that he likely didn't attack K-Corp's laboratory in an attempt to destroy its singularity, meaning that he's more prudent than Dongbik, even if he had similar beliefs to the main version. Although he had slightly different motivations. While Dongbik wanted to reset technological developments, Yi Sang clearly had nothing left to lose, where he was leader because others wanted him to be, and his motivations based on that were still different from the rest of the TLA members. He hides from them whenever he can so as not to make them turn against him, although he's still not as sane as the main version of Yi Sang. As for the spice bush e.g.o, the spice bush is a shrub that's found in the east of North America. Some see the growth of this as an indication of good agricultural land, and parts of it can be used to make tea and its fruits can be an alternative to allspice or pimento. Some Native American tribes also see medicinal applications from it. I suspect that in that reality, Dong Big is not scarred and is part of the damned dozen, based on Yi Sang being in her role. Now to talk about the Mola Office Fixer version of Yi Sang. Yi Sang was slightly annoyed when Otis was leaving the office again, and Otis asked what he meant by again, not appreciating his tone, as that business outing was strictly for professional purposes, asking if he understood. Yi Sang then asked how he can word it in any other way when every instance of her business outing had led to copious insobriety. Otis passed that off as the nature of that business, a generous amount of alcohol that has resulted in smoother negotiations with their contractors. Understanding her tactics, he advised her not to slumber overlong this time. She complained that he doesn't know the amount of work she puts into that office. Yi Sang ignored her grumbling, as arguing would only lead to pointless squabbles, which end up wasting time. Even more so as she's his boss. She said that she'd be heading out for a bit that day. It was about the contract that she snagged the previous day, which was coming soon, telling him to not leave any work behind before leaving the office for that job. As soon as Otis left the office, he sat in his seat and organized the documents. Unlike Otis, who acted as if she couldn't care less, Yi Sang was completely focused on his work. He was diligent and dedicated to it. What he didn't do was speak of most of what was in his head. He recalled all the times he had spent working, struggling ever since he joined that office, starting with contracts for the tasks too menial for the more serious offices, to slowly building up his reputation, the anxiety of missing the contract deadline, and at times his life was at risk due to underestimating the enemy's numerical advantages. After all that, their office seized a remarkable opportunity, like a contract from e.g.o, a wing, a sign of recognition. He was proud to be a member of their office, but he had some concerns. Is Otis going to be okay? She was clearly not a novice when it comes to fighting, and she keeps picking up work for their office, but could Otis really take on this job, which has such gravity, when he was unsure of his own capabilities? He opened the windows for some fresh air. He hopes that the rain would wash away the doubts that he had, but it did nothing to stop the ominous feeling that he had about the contracts. Okay, this is an alternative world where, instead of Sinclair being in Rain's role, it's Yi Sang being in Rain's role instead, where he's the loyal yet frustrated subordinate of an alcoholic and less serious Otis, who is in Olga's role, working for the Mola office. Except this reality is at a point before the fateful mission on the warp train that would lead a hungover Otis and her two fixers to enter the library to escape the warp train, only to be killed by the librarians within and having their skills utilized to kill and capture others. They were eventually released from the library by Angela, the AI turned human, who sacrificed being human to bring those captured into books back to life. Although not before a lengthy fight against a selfish bull and Red Mist fanboy. He'll likely end up in District 21, along with the other two, if events go the same as the reality where Sinclair was in Rain's role, who will eventually meet the damned dozen of that reality. Finally, we have W Corp Cleanup Agent Level 3. Yi Sang was on the Iron Horse, likely more conventional train, as warp trains are expensive to use even in standard class, and he'd likely know how they really operated, so he'd have to be crazier than Don Quixote to even consider using them. It rumbled forward, and the air was heavy inside it. The others within were silent as they rode the Iron Horse. He was asking himself why they were silent, but then he remembered that they are like him. They were likely loners, as companionship is a comfort seldom sought out, and scarcely expected. Certainly inside there. Adjacent or opposite to him, it makes no difference. He suspects that they lack the strength to will their lips into speech. Shoulders slumped, necks hung, vacant eyes gazing into, or fingers tapping at the small tools in their hands. Likely phones. I suspect that they're also like that because they see themselves as having nothing worth living for. At least nothing that matters. Where they're basically sleepwalking through life. I, and others like me, have felt like that. But since the Project Moon universe is grimdark as there, it's even worse. Yi Sang saw himself as no different from them in that regard. In there, he's voiceless and unfocused. There is a will detached from his own, his aimless eyes looking at none in particular. He was asking how long has it been since he was last given a day off. Yi Sang, you're working for a wing where labor rights in the city are terrible at the best of times. In there, it's probably even worse. Due to them ruling each district as their own private fiefdom, where as long as their taxes come in and they don't get any ideas, they can do pretty much anything they want. Anyway, he saw it as meaningless to measure that time, seeing it as an act of futility. He saw his employers in W Corp as quite adept at pilfering time and memories, likely referring to their partnership with T Corp and their save-state technology. That is their true singularity. That makes their journey worthwhile to them, not to mention possible, and also their secret hidden. Although it's said that a janitor doesn't use their services. His job is to clear up their mess. Even if he questions his perception of reality, and that includes the possibility of hallucinating or imagining his torn-apart body as he pulls them together. Perhaps he did this more times than he'd prefer to remember. He's likely not off by much, as he is exhausted due to being ruthlessly exploited by a wing that likely doesn't give a about his welfare, where even health insurance has a lot of red tape complicating its use. Worse than it is in the US in our world. He questions how much worth there was in truth. The existence of that iron horse is no different from his. He's betrayed by his feet. His arms aren't steered. His path is a track laid by the herd. Even with his immeasurable fatigue that he feels on his back, he commutes to work and commutes back home as the sun rises and sets. He rebuilds the bodies of the passengers, yet cares not for who they were, why they chose to ride that crazy train. The iron horse cares not about what others do. It comes and goes as told, much like him. The distinction between him and his transportation blurring. He asks if this existence and the existence of the iron horse was the same. He's fully aware of what's around him. His dagger on his waist. He might have been an unwitting passenger on the warp train, and there's no way of knowing. Then, the train arrived at the station. People exited and boarded. He exhaled at this. Nightmarish mental images took hold on him and filled him with terror. He pushes down his company cap over his eyes and rose. Time to get to work. Half of that day will involve training new employees, which is actually a relief for him, as he's usually cleaving and collecting the remains of slain passengers. Small comfort to him, but still comfort. He left the iron horse and made his way to the warp trains. The grin he had on him was worthless, as there was no place for a self on that path. In that reality, when he left N-Corp at Sangyi's suggestion, he was recruited by W-Corp, a wing who has backstreets that would be considered a good place to eat for Leatherface and Hannibal Lecter, where they can finally be themselves and not have people scream at them that aren't dinner. Although this role was considerably more messy, as he was there to clear up after the passengers, mutilated as they were, tore through each other. They also have time quotas that they need to achieve, and occasionally a colour fixer can get into standard class by mistake. And this is why the cleanup agents carry weapons, which are customized to their preferences, which is why Yi Sang has a dagger, and Hong Lu has his own preferred weapon. And then there are the normal passengers that are deranged and mutilated, that are live and hostile. He'd need to fight those. Yi Sang's apathetic look on him, in this case, was not just the fact that he was a corporate slave. It's the fact that, like the other Yi Sangs covered, he had nothing left to lose, and he was just looking for a place where he could be useful. There he has employment, he has a place that he can go to at least sleep, but as far as work-life balance is concerned, it's increasingly skewed towards the former, where in that job, he either finds a way of getting promoted out of the cleanup crew, he gets fired, or he dies from karoshi. Or something else. That simple. It's possible that employment in a wing also comes with company housing, as they'd need somewhere to sleep in between shifts, which makes their place of living entirely dependent on them being employed within W-Corp, where if they were fired, they'd be homeless and sent back to the back streets, most likely, where they'd better sort themselves out before they become a prime rib in one of the many restaurants. Well, I expect the same could be said for the other wings, but it might vary depending on their policies. Yi-sang is certainly valued enough to be a trainer for new employees. He has at least a small purpose to his actions, even if the rest of it feels meaningless to him, as his friends have either hidden themselves, betrayed him, or are just dead. The League of Nine is no more, and what exists now is but a twisted parody of it. Perhaps it's only a matter of time before this Yi-sang is no more, even if his body remains healthy enough to work. The constant of each of these variants is the calm, almost monk-like patience and a lack of expression and interest in what he was supposed to do. With the Seven Association, even though he was good at instructing his co-workers in the fighting styles of the other associations, he didn't see it as something that mattered. As part of the Blade lineage, he might have been well known among them as Slayer, due to being good at slaughter, but he was calm and collected outside of battle. While as the leader of the Technology Liberation Alliance, swapping roles with Dong Baek, he had a different objective to those that are genuinely a part of that organization. Yes, the difference between them is that the Seven Association variant is on the right side of the law. The Blade lineage variant is part of an organized crime syndicate that currently has no known affiliation with one of the Fingers, although there is one suspect. Another one is the leader of a terrorist organization who wants to press the reset button on technological development. Yes, technological development. Who has a different plan, but that plan isn't clear, although it's likely to be similar to Dong Baek's. But since he's not dead and has the Spice Bush e.g.o, he's clearly one with more prudence than Dong Baek had. Not one to make attacks on the wing facility, even if the security is so pathetic a bunch of clowns could walk in and get to the screening room. I mean, in the main story, the TLA attacked that wing facility of K-Corp 3 times, and yet security wasn't revised to prevent them from getting farther than that. With the W-Corp cleanup agent variants, he saw training others as preferable to the actual cleanup. Not that it would help with his give up on life look. Speaking of which, another constant is that look on his face. The one that, it shows that he feels that he has nothing left to lose, and he would welcome death if he actually stayed dead, which, unlike the main story version of Yi-sang, with them it's actually possible. There are also identities where they switch roles with characters last seen in Library of Rowena, such as the Mola Boatworks fixer Sinclair and Mola Office fixer Yi-sang, both in the same role as Rain, which also shows that the identities are not bound by time as some worlds are, more ahead than others. The latter of those two would appear to be behind that one, where it's set sometime either before the library defeated the Stray Dog Syndicate or not long after, but before the librarians fought the Mola Office, both during the Urban Legend section of Library of Rowena, which is also around the time that the Distortion Detective is set, at least at the point it was discontinued. Yes, it has been discontinued for now as they want to make a game out of that. At least at the point I've uploaded this. As for the next of the damned dozen that I'll be covering in this, that will be Ishmael. And as of the time of this upload, there are a few interesting ones that she'll have. I just need to know about the story of Chapter 5 in order to add a little context to that. Well, Ishmael's story is likely to be more intense than the others, based on Chapter 4.5. Until next time, hail the rabbit!